Hello, we are continuing our discussion of the Cold War. We are still reading our textbook. Again, you can find this on the National Emergency Archive or National Emergency Library online. It is Prentice Hall, United States History. The version that you are going to find is a more recent edition of this book that I'm using, so it might not line up perfectly, but we are going to continue on. So we're still reading about the effects of the war, and we're going to start talking about how a new world takes shape during this time. After the war ended in August of 1945, plans for the post-war world had to be turned into realities. However, the changes that took place were not often what the Allies had envisioned at Yalta and Potsdam. The world map changes. World War II altered the political realities of the world. The borders of Poland, for example, shifted slightly to the west. In time, as you'll read in the next chapter, differences between the Soviet Union and its former allies led to the division of Germany into two separate countries, Communist East Germany and non-Communist West Germany. Nearly all the nations of Eastern Europe became communist states under the control of the Soviet Union. Other countries experienced profound political changes. Communist and non-communist interests clashed in Eastern Europe. In China, a long-standing civil war between nationalists and communists resumed. In Japan, General Douglas MacArthur headed an American military occupation and supervised the writing of a new constitution. It abolished the armed forces, except for purposes of defense, gave women the right to vote, enacted democratic reforms, and established the groundwork for a full economic recovery. Imperialism goes into decline. The war also marked the end of Western European domination of the world. Since the 1500s, nations such as Britain, France, and Spain had exerted paramount influence on global developments. They colonized much of Africa and the Middle East and Asia and the Americas. They had controlled the world trade and finance, led the Industrial Revolution, and stood at the forefront of the world military power. The aggressive acquisition of territories by Japan and Germany underscored the abuses of imperialism. After World War II, colonial peoples renewed their drive for independence from European powers. Freed from Japanese domination, the East Indies had no interest in returning to Dutch colonial status. Nor did Indochina want to see the return of French rule. India, Burma, colonies in the Middle East, and Africa all had their sights on independence. By the end of the war, it was clear that the age of imperialism was in the twilight of its existence. The British Empire, the predominant power of the 19th century, came out of the war suffering severe economic shortages and within decades would see the loss of most of its colonies. The balance of power shifts. Into the power vacuum stepped the United States and the Soviet Union. They had played the most decisive roles in defeating the Axis powers, and they emerged from the war confident and strong. Indeed, they so dominated the post-war world that they became known as superpowers. Of the two superpowers, the United States was clearly the stronger. Except for the attack on Pearl Harbor, no major battle had been fought on U.S. soil. In addition, American industry had boomed during the war. By 1945, America was wealthy, militarily powerful, and confident. By contrast, much of the war had been fought on Soviet soil. Its industries, cities, and peoples had suffered terribly. Still, the Red Army controlled most of Eastern Europe and threatened to move further west. Militarily, although the Americans had the atomic bomb, the Soviets had the Red Army, the world's largest military force. So checkpoint. What impact did World War II have on the relative roles of the United States and Britain in the world? So what we see happening is the British influence starts to fade while the American influence increases. In fact, Britain fades from being like the largest power in the world to not even being one of the top two. All right, so that's going to finish this up for now. We're going to move on in the next video. Again, hopefully you guys are being safe and, enjoying your time away from school. Bye.